Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Sabrina Sham of the Joint Financial Intelligence Unit of the Hong Kong Police Force. And today I will give a sharing on the methods of money laundering and terrorist financing and suspicious transaction reporting. So my presentation today will be mainly comprised of 5 parts. First of all is a very brief introduction of the Joint Financial Intelligence Unit, followed by some key legislation that we may face every day. And then the third part will be the methods of money laundering and terrorist financing, followed by the suspicious transaction reporting, including some statistics, submission way, etc. And then the last part will be a recommended narrative structure of a suspicious transaction report. So about Joint Financial Intelligence Unit, it is actually co-staffed by officers of the police and customs. It is the sole agency to manage the suspicious transaction reporting regime in Hong Kong. So we are also responsible for financial intelligence exchange with financial intelligence units and also legal enforcement agencies worldwide. We have been a member of the M1 Group since 1996. The M1 Group is a united body of 166 financial intelligence units worldwide. It provides the FIUs a platform to securely exchange financial intelligence to combat laundering and terrorist financing and associated predicate offenses. So worth mentioning, last year we established the Financial Intelligence Investigation Bureau, FIB. So we are currently under the FIB now. So the JFIU is responsible for several matters, including the operation analysis of suspicious transaction reports, and also conduct global exchange of financial intelligence and information. We also will conduct strategic analysis of financial intelligence and other information, and conduct research on the current trends and typologies. We are also responsible for the operation of the stream system, which is where we manage the suspicious transaction reports. And through cooperation with several stakeholders, including FIUs worldwide, also LEAs locally or worldwide, financial institutions, DNFBPs, policy bureaus, regulatory authorities, and also professional bodies. We are also responsible for the coordination of AML and CFT training and outreach, like giving a seminar like today. So the next part, I'll briefly talk about some key legislation. So here are the 3 main key legislation that are related to us. The first of all is the Drug Trafficking Recovery of Proceeds Ordinance, CAP 405, and also the Organized and Serious Crimes Ordinance, CAP 455, and the United Nations Anti-Terrorism Measures Ordinance, CAP 575. So in terms of the anti-money laundering prospect, having reasonable grounds to believe any property in whole or in part, directly or indirectly represent proceeds of drug trafficking or indictable offense, deals with the property will commit an offense with the maximum penalty of 5 million Hong Kong dollar fine and 14 years of imprisonment under the CAP 405 and CAP 455. Regarding the counter-financing of terrorism, any person shall not provide or collect directly or indirectly any property with the intention that the property be used or knowing that the property will be used in whole or in part to commit one or more terrorist acts under the Cap 575 will commit an offense with the maximum penalty of 14 years of imprisonment. So regarding the filing of STR, if any person knows or suspects any property represents or was used or is intended to be used in connection with the proceeds of drug trafficking or indictable offenses or terrorist property, should disclose that knowledge or suspicion to an authorized officer, which is JFIU in Hong Kong. Failing to do so will result in a maximum penalty of level 5 fine, which is 50,000 Hong Kong dollars, and 3 months of imprisonment. So we can see that in this slide and the previous slide, it also mentioned about suspects. Regarding this, suspicion is a relatively objective concept, but mainly we'll talk about reasonable suspicion. So after filing an STR, we have to be aware that if you know or suspect that a disclosure has been made, that means a suspicious transaction report was filed, the person shall not disclose to any other person any matter which is likely to prejudice any investigation which might be conducted following the first mentioned disclosure. So basically, if you have filed a STR, you should not inform your customer that you have filed an STR against him or her. Otherwise, you may face a maximum penalty of fine and also imprisonment. So the next part, I will talk about the methods of money laundering and terrorist financing. So money laundering covers all kinds of methods used to change the identity of crime proceeds so that it appears to have originated from a legitimate source. In general, it can be categorized into 3 stages: placement, layering, and integration. And I will talk about each stage in details in the following slides. Stage 1, placement. It basically means placing the crime proceeds in the financial system. So the method of placing the crime proceeds into financial system are more or less the same in the previous years, including the smuggling of cash, disguising the crime proceeds as normal business, genuine business payments, remittance to other jurisdictions or countries, purchase of valuables, including precious metals, gold, etc., and also real estate and securities. It also may involve some currency exchange, such as exchanging Hong Kong dollars into foreign currencies. In recent years, there is an increasing trend of using cryptocurrency in trading, and we can also see that it was used as a very common method of placing crime proceeds into financial system for money laundering. So the second stage is layering. It involves the conversion of crime proceeds into other form and creating a complex layer of financial transaction in order to disguise the audit trail and the source and the true ownership of the funds. So for example, when a large payment of transaction was supposed to be made, but then fraudsters may use multiple transfers of relatively smaller amount in order not to trigger the bank's alert system. So this is a way of layering. And it may be conducted in multiple times, like repeated and repeat in order to defraud the audit trail. The last part is integration. That means to integrate the laundered funds from different sources and to purchase clean assets so that the assets or funds can be used by criminals or syndicates. The 3 stages of money laundering are actually not distinct. It's very often overlapping with each other and repeated so as to make tracing of crime proceeds and their source more difficult by legal enforcement agencies. Regarding terrorist financing, it is defined as the financial support in any form of terrorism or of those who encourage, plan, or engage in terrorism. So you can see that the method of terrorist financing is pretty much similar to money laundering, mostly having to do with concealment and disguise. It also involves the physical transportation of cash, as cash is a rather effective way to hide the true source of fund, and also use multiple bank accounts and money service operators in order to hide the true source of fund. So the overall level of terrorism threat in Hong Kong is now moderate, which means that there is a possibility of an attack, but there is no specific intelligence suggesting that Hong Kong is likely to be a target. So the next part, I will talk more about suspicious transaction report. So the suspicious transaction report is a cooperation between 3 parties, including reporting entities, financial intelligence unit, and law enforcement agencies, with an objective to achieve anti-money laundering and counter-financing of terrorism. So it requires a public and private partnership. First of all, for reporting entities, which are financial institutions or DNFBPs, including TCSPs, they shall conduct customer due diligence, including know your customer, to get more information about your customer, and also proper record keeping and build up internal control measures. And if there is a reasonable suspicion, consider filing a suspicious transaction report, which will be then handled by a financial intelligence unit that is Joint Financial Intelligence Unit in Hong Kong, who is responsible for maintaining the STR regime and also conducting intelligence exchange and international cooperation with other FIU in the world. Then the intelligence will be passed to the appropriate law enforcement agencies, which is in Hong Kong, police, customs, ICAC, SFC, etc. They will conduct financial investigation and also asset tracing, and if appropriate, they will obtain restraint and confiscation order from the court in Hong Kong to confiscate the crime proceeds. And sometimes they will work on the mutual legal assistance with other LEA in the world. So the STR mechanism is, and a very gist flow chart is shown in this slide. From the reporting entity, the information was submitted to the FIU file STR, and then the FIU will conduct analysis to capture useful information and convert them to intelligence, to pass to relevant law enforcement agencies, to conduct further comprehensive financial investigation to gather evidence to substantiate an offense. Here is the statistics of the suspicious transaction report, which shows the number of STR received by JFIU from 2019 to 2022 until November. So we can see that there is in general an increase in the number of STR received every year from 50,000 in 2019 to over 63,000 this year. So we are expecting the number of STR received this year will be much larger than 2021. So this is a chart showing the sectoral breakdown of suspicious transaction reports received in 2022, also until November. So from the left to the right, it shows the number of STR filed by different sectors, from traditional banks, virtual banks, insurance companies, money lenders, security firms, store value facilities licensees, money service providers, real estate agents, dealer in precious products, law firms, accountancy firms, TCSPs, and others. So the number of STR filed by TCSP in 2022 until November is 177. So as expected, we received most number of STRs from banks, including traditional banks, virtual banks, and also store value facilities licensees. It is because most of the STR are triggered by fraud or money laundering allegations. And as everyone knows, that the number of deception case and also money laundering case has been increasing substantially over the years. So we are expecting that most of the STRs were filed by banks and store value facilities licensees. So this is a chart showing the number of STRs received from TCSPs between 2018 to 2022. So we can see that from 81 in 2018, the number of STR has increased quite a lot to 177 this year until November. So there has been a gradual increase in the number of STR received. So now I'll talk about some common red flags indicators for TCSP. The first three is pretty much similar. First of all, multi-jurisdictional and or complex structure of corporate entities or trusts are established without a valid grant, and payments are made or received without a clear connection to the actual activities of the corporate entity. The use of offshore bank accounts without legitimate economic necessities. Well, for example, if a company which is involved in trading of clothing in foreign country, which is major target or market is also not in Hong Kong, intends to open a company in Hong Kong and later maybe a bank account, this might be a suspicious indicator because normally they will not involve in any transaction in Hong Kong if their customers and suppliers are all in foreign jurisdictions. Another common red flag indicator is that the customer is unwilling or refuse to provide information or documentary proof of himself or herself or beneficial owners of trusts or companies. So during the CDD and KYC stage, often the reporting entity will ask the customer for some supporting document or explanation to see if they have a reasonable or legitimate reason to explain about some suspicious transaction. If the company is engaged or if the company is a genuine business company and its transaction is for genuine business purpose, usually they are more willing to provide the necessary documentary proof as an explanation. While on the other hand, if the company are trying to hide the genuine, the true reason of transaction, they are more unwilling or refuse to provide information on the matter. And the next one is that the source or destination of funds are unknown and transactions are heavily cash-based, which should normally be carried out through other payment facilities. For example, for a large amount of payments, usually genuine business companies will conduct them in remittance in one go. However, if they are trying to hide or to disguise the audit trail, they will conduct the transactions in relatively smaller amount, but in multiple times, so as to not trigger the bank's reflex risk assessment. Some more indicators like customers' background is not commensurate with the value of transactions also are very common red flag indicators. For example, for individuals of relatively lower wage occupation, however, their transaction turnover is actually like 100 times larger than its salary, it may be a suspicious indicator. Also, it applies to companies as usually they will give an expected turnover amount. If the actual turnover is much larger than the expected one, this is also a suspicious indicator. The company is established primarily for the purpose of collecting funds from various sources, which are then transferred to local or foreign bank accounts that have no apparent ties with the company. Usually, this may show that the company is, rather than genuine business transaction, they may be acting as an unlicensed money service operators instead. Like the previous example, if a company that is engaged in trading of furniture, however, the transaction parties are mostly companies engaging in trading of food or precious metals, etc., that may be a suspicious indicator worth alert. And also the incorporation of a company by a non-resident with no links or activities in jurisdiction where the company is established. For example, if a company held by foreign nationals wish to open an account in Hong Kong, however, as the director himself is not a Hong Kong local resident, the company is also not mainly in Hong Kong. The market is not in Hong Kong. That is also a common red flag indicator. So how do we identify suspicious activity? We can use the SAFE approach, which is a systemic approach to identify suspicious financial activities. The SAFE approach means screen, ask, find, and evaluate. And I will talk about them one by one. Screening the subject entity's background and transactions. That is to see if there is any suspicious transaction pattern. For example, large or frequent cash transactions, an account being used as a temporary repository for funds. Also, the account may be left dormant for quite a long time after account opening, but then at a particular time, there is a significantly increased activity or transaction. Sometimes there are U-turn transactions. That means the money pass from a person or company to another and then return back to the original person or company. These are some transactions that we consider there is no economic sense. So the reason for conduct such transaction is relatively suspicious. So then we should ask the customer appropriate questions to clarify the circumstances. For example, for U-turn transactions, the customer may be able to give a legitimate reason. For example, they were supposed to be transacting with another company, but then the business was called off, so they returned the money back to that company. So this may be a legitimate reason. So if the customer refuses or is unwilling to provide explanation of the financial activity, or provides explanation that doesn't make any sense or assessed to be untrue, that is also a suspicious indicator. Then we can find relevant records for review to consider if the customer's financial activity is to be expected or is unusual. For example, for individual, if the occupation, they are relatively low wage earner, or they live in residential address, which is a low cost housing, for example, public housing estate. And also the age, if their age is very young or very old, we are not expecting frequent high value transactions in their account. So the average balance and the number and type of transactions seen on an account over a certain period of time may be able to give an indication of the financial activity which is normal for the customer. If the transaction activity later deviates a lot from the previous financial activity, that should be considered as unusual and worth to be reviewed. So after doing the previous parts, it is your decision whether or not to make an STR. If a suspicion is substantiated, then you should file a STR report to the JFIU. So let's talk about how to submit a STR report. So basically, we accept the submission of STR in the following method. If you are submitting a large number of STR, we strongly recommend you to apply for an account in the stream system, which means a suspicious transaction report and management system, so that you can input the STR in bulk, and it is a lot more convenient. And there are also other ways of submission, including email to JFIU mailbox, fax, and mail to the following address, and also telephone, but I think telephone is not very commonly used. So if you file by email, fax, or mail, you can download a standardized form from the JFIU website, which I will talk about in the following slides. So the recommended structure of STR. As you can see, this is a standardized form of the suspicious transaction report, and it comprises of various parts, and I'll go through them one by one. So the first part is STR summary. So worth noting, if the filing of STR is triggered by inquiry or search warrant received from different legal enforcement agencies, you can tick the yes here in this box to show that the report is related to existing investigation, and then fill in the case reference number and also the officer in charge team. So the next part is reporting entity, that is to fill in the information of the reporting body. So we hope you can fill in the phone and email address, so that if the officer of JFIU face any question when handling your STR, we can contact the person for query. So if you have filed an STR against the customer previously, you can tick the yes from this box. And then this part, subject, is about the information of the customer. There's some basic information including name, Hong Kong ID, or if not applicable, other ID like passport or other resident ID, etc. DOB, gender, occupation. So if you do not have any information about some area, you can just leave it blank. So the nature, this box is about if the customer, the subject you're filling is the director of the company that you fill in for the organization part, then you can fill his role in the nature part, like director, shareholder, etc. So for the organization part, just fill in the name of the organization and whether it's a local company. If it is, then fill in the CR and BR number. And for overseas company, then fill in the registration number and country. So for a related person, you can fill in the director, shareholder, or other related person information here. So the next two part is phone and address. Next part is account. Basically, you can fill in the account information if you have any. Like for bank, they will fill in the bank account number, etc. We understand that sometimes you may not have any information about financial accounts held by the customers. So if you do not have any information, you can just leave it blank. Or otherwise, if you are not holding that account, like you are not a bank, you are not holding a bank account, but you know that the customer holds a bank account and elsewhere, and you know the information, you can fill in the account details in this part also. So if the account is closed, then you can fill the closing date and also the balance. Sometimes the customer holds an integrated account. So we hope that you can fill in the total balance of the account here. And if, for example, the integrated account is subdivided into several dummy accounts, you can fill the details of the dummy accounts in the additional information. So basically, if the box above is not helpful, is not relevant, and you cannot choose where to fill in, then you can fill in the additional information part. And also for multi-currency balance account, we wish you can, this part is due to the system restraint, we can only fill in one balance. So we hope that you can fill in the total balance and choose the corresponding currency and give the breakdown of the account in the additional information part. So transaction, just fill in the suspicious transaction and the review period. And the total amount of suspicious transactions and total period covering the transactions. If you do not have such information, then just leave it blank. So for suspected crimes, usually I can illustrate some commonly chosen crimes. First of all is money laundering in here, and then fraud, and also tax crimes, and forgery if the customer submitted some forged documents. So the next part is suspicious indicators, and you can choose as many as possible if it fits. Some commonly chosen suspicious indicators are temporary repository of funds, numerous transaction counterparties without apparent reasonable cause, shell company, etc. Then this is a part saying narrative comment about the question transactions. In this part, you can fill in free text, so you can just type whatever you want. And I will give a very brief recommended narrative structure in the later part. So for open source information, sometimes you will search online whether your customer is involved in any investigation or arrested for crime. If so, then you can attach the website, the hyperlink of the news here, so that we can have a better information of the news. So lastly, I'll talk about the recommended narrative structure. It is mainly composed of 5 parts. The first of all is the triggering factors. Second, the background of subjects. Thirdly, the transactions. Fourthly, the reporting entities and queries and open source information. And lastly, the conclusion and way forward. So the triggering factors. So if you found that your customer is involved in crimes such as fraud, corruption, sanctions, terrorist acts, etc., you can write in this part. Just write briefly is fine, because in later part you can write in details. Or if you receive the search warrants or protection orders or etc., or other court orders from legal enforcement agencies, you can write so and then quote the case reference number and the officers in charge team so that we can analyze, process the STR and pass the intelligence to the relevant agencies later. Or if the STR is triggered by open source information, like I've mentioned before, adverse news stating that your customer was involved in a certain kind of investigation, crime investigation, or arrested, you can state so and the triggering factors. Or if there is no adverse news or not triggered by court order or LEA investigation, but based on proactive review against the customer, that maybe you find the transactions pattern was very suspicious, you can also write this as the triggering factors. Then you can provide some basic information about your customer. For individuals, you can provide the age, occupation, income, transaction history, etc. Because like I've said, the income of this individual may be a very good indicator to compare his actual turnover amount with his income to see if the transaction is commensurate with his background. And then for corporate customer, you can provide the date of establishment, business nature, expected transaction amount, etc. So similarly, as I've given the example before, if the company's business nature is totally irrelevant to the business nature of its counterparties, it may be considered as an unusual and suspicious indicator. Then we'll talk about the transactions. Then you can write the reviewed period because it can be used to calculate the daily turnover amount, and also the fund movement pattern, whether there is a very sudden change compared to its transaction pattern previously. Or if there is any other suspicious transactions, such as a large amount and frequent transactions. So then, after conducting a CDD and KYC, you can write the reply of your customers in this part, reporting entities, inquiries, and open source information. So even if your customer has provided some reason to explain about their transactions, you can provide it to us, even though it may be unreasonable, or we can use it to check. And then the open source link also. And then lastly, the conclusion, the way forward part, with which you can provide the follow-up actions. You may take various actions, for example, conduct an enhanced CDD measure, or if you consider that the transactions was really suspicious and you decided to end your business relationship, you can also write in this part. So you are expected to get some feedback after submitting the STR report. And after submitting, we will send you an acknowledgement of receipt. And then after that, we'll give consent or no consent or not applicable regarding whether or not we consent or not consent you to continue deal with the property of your customer. Also, there is a quarterly STR analysis upload in the stream system, which we will give some brief STR statistics of that quarter, and also some common typology or other crime trend that we think it is worth mentioning. So I just talk about very briefly about some indicators, and if you wish to read more in details, you can visit our website, or if you have any inquiry, you can ask in the Q&A session, or send an email to the JFIU mailbox, and we shall reply to you as soon as possible. So this is the end of my sharing, and thank you very much for your attention.